Welcome to the Economy Magazine at I-24 News, where we provide a daily view on the world markets and the global economy. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Coming up today, Israel, the guest of honor at an innovation summit in Shanghai. We speak with Israel's foreign ministry directly from the event as it's happening. And what's the state of relations between Israel and the Arab world? Formal recognition of the Jewish state remains distant for many, but under the surface, how much economic cooperation exists between Israel and the Gulf? Now to the financial headlines. Well, the drop in oil prices weighing on Asian shares on Wednesday, though Tokyo managed to move higher. Japan's Nikkei advanced 0.67% on expectations that the country's central bank will add further stimulus. Meanwhile, the Hang Seng slid 0.8%, and the Shang-high also declined 1.72%. European equities all to the upside on Wednesday. By the afternoon, London's FTSE up 0.52%, Germany's DAX higher 0.54%, and France's CAC also up 0.33%. Well, U.S. stocks opened higher as investors eagerly awaited news from the Fed and its two-day policy meeting kicking off today. Well, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly on Tuesday to adopt a resolution calling for an end to the U.S. economic embargo against Cuba. 191 UN member states voted in favor, while the U.S. and Israel voted against. U.S. President Barack Obama has said on repeated occasions that his administration does not think the blockade works as expected, and therefore it should be canceled. Still, the U.S. voted against the measure at the UN initiated by Cuba. Meanwhile, the reconciliation process between the two nations is expected to continue despite the motion at the General Assembly.
We hope that the United States and Cuba can keep consulting each other to consolidate the improvement of relations between the two countries.
Guatemala has elected a new president, winning 67.5% of the vote on an anti-corruption platform. 46-year-old Jimmy Morales is a former comedian with no government experience. He also has some unconventional policy ideas, like giving poor children smartphones and also reconsidering the role of the military. Well, staying true to his pledge on fighting corruption, Morales vows to audit institutions, increase the Attorney General's budget, and also make government spending more transparent.
It is embarrassing for Guatemala, for everyone to realize, the people, the world, that our political class is corrupt. And so because of this, the people have voted for Jimmy Morales because the people don't want more corruption.
Meanwhile, Brazil's finance minister pointed to several paths for the nation to climb out of its current economic doldrums. Latin America's largest economy has been struggling to rebalance the public accounts as a deepening political and economic crisis has hurt revenue and investor confidence. Brazil is a major commodities exporter and has been greatly affected by the global drop in prices. Finance Minister Joaquim Levy suggested trade agreements as well as a $50 billion infrastructure investment program would help kickstart growth.
If we make investing easier with some regulatory changes, to have this 200 billion reals logistics plan which could be launched, we've got a lot of paths out of the crisis.
The African continent has also been stymied by the lower commodity prices. Economic growth is at its weakest rate in 6 years. This is according to a new review released by the International Monetary Fund. According to the fund, things could get even worse for the world's poorest continent, especially if the global economy continues to soften. The IMF also said Africa was likely to grow just 3.75% this year and 4.25% the following, a significant decline since the years before and after the 2008 financial crisis.
The first challenge is to strengthen the competitiveness of African economies, notably integration into international business and global value chains. Secondly, we must reduce inequality.
In tech news, Apple and Twitter both beat quarterly revenue estimates on Tuesday. Apple saw sales of iPhones surge 36%, largely driven by the launch of the 6S and 6S Plus models last month. Apple now, the globe's largest company by market value, said it sold some 48 million iPhones in Q4. As for Twitter, it reported better than expected revenue and adjusted profit, but slower user growth than originally forecast. Twitter recorded 320 million average active monthly users in Q3, up from 316 million in the previous quarter, but still missing expectations of 324 million users. Israel was the guest of honor at the Innovation Conference in Shanghai, which is the leading economic forum in China. For Insight Now, we are joined on the phone by Haggai Shagrir of Israel's Foreign Ministry, and he was at this conference. Thanks very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Well, tell us about the highlights of this conference.
Well, the conference, the Pujang Innovation Forum, is probably the most important innovation conference in China, and it runs for the last 8 years, and it involves experts from the government, industry, and academia. And as you mentioned, Israel was selected this year as the country of honor, and the meaning is that the whole focus of the conference is on Israeli innovation. And Deputy Prime Minister Silvan Shalom and China's Minister of Science and Technology opened the conference. And actually, this event, the forum, is part of China-Israel Joint Innovation Committee that was established last January by China Vice Premier and by then Foreign Minister Lieberman in Beijing. And in this meeting in Beijing, the two sides signed on a three-year action plan on innovation that involves about 10 different ministries and agencies from each side, on various issues such as economy, research and development, both industrialized and basic, health, education, higher education, agriculture, and more.
All right. Well, tell us a bit more about these joint projects.
And so, as I said, it's a very important platform between the two countries. China has a similar platform only with Korea and Germany, and it's an important platform that allows greater engagement between the two sides, bring opportunity to Israeli business for joint research, seminars, more exchange between the universities. It means more scholarships for students from both sides. So it's a great thing, for the relationship of the two countries.
Well, Haggai Shagrir of Israel's Foreign Ministry, thanks very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Well, despite no formal diplomatic ties between Israel and the Gulf countries, a growing chorus of voices indicate that there is more than meets the eye. Daniel Roth reports.
Iran has served as a perceived common enemy for Israel and a number of Gulf states in recent years, and therefore created a bridge for countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel, despite having no official diplomatic ties, to come to the table with the U.S. brokering potentially lucrative defense weapons deals. Indeed, according to a recent poll conducted by the Interdisciplinary Center in central Israel, while just over 50% of Saudis see Iran as their central enemy, just under 20% say it's Israel.
The Arabs are changing. The Arabs, many of them, sometimes openly and sometimes in corridors and whispers, they say Israel is our friend.
Indeed, members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, and others, may buy Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system in a move to bolster defenses against Iran, according to a Sky News report. The purchase, which Sky reports could be worth tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, would go through American companies involved in developing the Iron Dome system with Israeli defense company Rafael, if a deal is reached. The Iron Dome system is reported to have brought down the effectiveness of rockets from the Gaza Strip by 90%. Bahrain's foreign minister told Sky News the Israelis have their small Iron Dome, will have a much bigger one in the GCC. An agreement is slated to include other U.S.-Israel-designed long-range missiles aimed at interception.
Well, for further insight on the report, we are joined in studio by Neve Ellis of the Jerusalem Post and our very own Ayman Siksek. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Well, let's talk about Israel's diplomatic relations with these countries, but most importantly, the economic relations here.
Yeah, so it's a wonderfully interesting thing that, Israel has ties with, of course, Egypt and Jordan. And, with Egypt, they have about $100 million of trade every year. But with these other countries that there aren't diplomatic ties, there are ways of going about trading with them. A lot of times it's through a third party. A good example is Turkey. A lot of times Israeli trade will go through Turkey or another European country. And that sort of inflates the trade statistics with those countries, even though it's actually going to some of these places. And for a while it was a much more above board. We actually had diplomatic and trade missions in Oman and in Qatar. But over the years, as political tensions rose, those were taken away. Just because they weren't above board, though, doesn't mean that all of the relations stopped.
Interesting. What are some of the European countries that serve as a mediator?
Well, so Turkey is a big one. Another one is Denmark.
Oh, interesting.
So there was an example where a country was actually found, a company in Israel was found to be selling internet surveillance to Iran via Europe, and it was to Iran.
How's that possible?
The arch nemesis of Israel.
And they want to give away their internet secrets?
Quite the opposite. They were using it to monitor their people. So it was a very big scandal. The company, their stock went down tremendously right after that happened. But this has happened so much throughout history. The Iran-Contra deal was, Israel and Iran were enemies there, and there were arms trades going on then. So what's happening behind the scenes is never quite as apparent.
Well, Ayman, he mentions Iran here. What about Saudi?
Right. Well, Saudi Arabia is also a big player in this, and there's also a history here. I mean, up until the 1970s, Israel was buying oil also secretly from Iran. And when we say secretly, you have to really take a moment to consider that, because it's not really a secret. The cat's been out of the bag for years now. People do know about this. The company Neve mentioned is Allot Communications. In 2012, Bloomberg exposed this story. They were trading, this Israeli company was selling this equipment to Iran for 5 years before people found out about this. And the way this was done, although it was through a European distributor, the way this was made successful is because Iran is under this vast category that's called Europe/Middle East/Asia category for distribution. Exactly. And Iran is in there. Now, this is made possible because both the country selling the product and the country buying it kind of play dumb, as if they don't know where the products end up, and they're not marked made in Israel intentionally for this purpose.
Yeah, a lot of times on the way they get scrubbed of made in Israel labels and any identifying marks, but every so often you'll find some sort of controversy. Like last year in Saudi Arabia, they found a bunch of persimmons that were labeled as being grown in Israel, and there was a huge outcry, and they were, taken out, and everyone said, "Well, how did these get here?" So it's.
Well, what about on a micro scale here with ordinary civilians in the Muslim world?
I think that one of the things that's interesting on those lines is that as the internet economy has grown, there have been unusual ways for Israel to do business with Arab countries that couldn't have happened before, because whereas shipping requires, some physical thing to move from place to place, it requires a lot more oversight. With internet things, it's not the same. And of course, Israel has a big Arab population, and many of them are very tech savvy. There are a lot of Arab startups that they sort of combine the Arabic language of the startup nation, and those are marketed towards the Arab world. So there are these applications and programs and websites that are actually made in Israel that are very popular in the Arab world, even in countries that don't actually have diplomatic relations with Israel.
Right, because we have a significant population here that speaks Arabic and also shares a similar culture, so that can be very appealing to people from the rest of the Middle East as well. Let's talk about Israel, though, being a tech powerhouse, and how this is also attracting ordinary civilians from all over the Middle East.
That's right. I mean, technology, you have to remember, is making the world smaller. It's less and less possible now to be isolated economically and technologically from the world. And in the 1990s, if we're mentioning the Muslim world, Israel officially tried to establish economic relations with Indonesia and Malaysia. And this was, on the height of the Oslo Accords. There was a huge optimism about Israel establishing relations with these countries. It was publicized everywhere, both in Malaysia and Indonesia and in Israel. This is not a secret. But Malaysia pulled back a few years later, and trade did go underground. Some people say it's still going on to this day. It's part of the very complex story.
All right, well, just last word here. If these ties are so deep economically, why is it not publicized?
They're not so deep, but they're deep enough to try to promote closer diplomatic ties. This is sort of laying the groundwork. This is the track 2 that's going on. Every time we're talking about, the politicians here are talking about dealing with Israel-Palestinian peace, they're talking about enlarging the framework and including the GCC states. And, having trade ties with them is a way of bringing them into the fold. It's also something that would be great for Israel to have a bigger market, bigger trade partners.
All right. Well, hopefully this is more to be in the future. Thank you all very much for being with us, and join us again tomorrow for all your business insight here at I-24 News. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Thanks for watching.